Are you aware of the salsa tooling meeting that's been happening?
I've not been keeping up with it.
Yeah.
Is it at the same time?
No. So there is a meeting. It's Fridays at 10 a.m. Eastern, I think. Just wanted to, because I think one of the things separately to everything else, and I'll talk to you offline, but there's some interesting stuff in the document, which actually it's somewhat relevant to some of the things that we're doing with Fresca here, and I'll post it in the chat. Actually, yeah, I'll even add it to the agenda because we don't have a ton on the agenda here.
Yeah, it sort of overlaps with the meeting that we have on Friday.
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah, I figured.
Yeah,
So
too many meetings all at the same time. Story of all of
Yeah.
our lives, I think.
Cool.
So
Give
this
it
meeting
another.
just disappeared from my calendar. I'm not sure why.
Oh, weird.
I mean, I see all the other OSF, OpenSSF meetings, but
let me go and
Mhm.
check. I mean, according to this, it's still. So is there? I mean, huh? Wait a second. Wait. Yeah. What the heck? That's weird.
Yeah.
I will. Yeah, that's probably one of the reasons why. Huh. Okay. I will.
Yeah, scrolling back several weeks, I don't see it in anywhere.
Huh.
So I wonder if someone just
That's-
hit delete on it.
Yeah, that's probably on the we've run into some issues with like the OpenSSF calendar in the past. So weird. Okay.
I see one back in the end of June. Let's see if that's still there. Yeah, it's in June, and that's the last. No, still there. 13th of July.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. Give me 1 second just to see if anybody is
Need to rename it.
Oh yeah, it was still named Secure Software Factory for some reason after we renamed it. But okay. Give me a second here just to all right, let me just reach out to them now while it's fresh in my head. So Jerry, Khalil, right. All right, so while that's going on, let me make sure I share the notes here. Okay. So can somebody just post the meeting notes in the chat here? Just I have way too many tabs open while trying to do that. And so while that's going on, just as a reminder, this meeting's being recorded. It'll be uploaded to YouTube shortly after. Thanks, Brad. And it'll be uploaded to YouTube shortly thereafter. And also, your participation in this meeting is an agreement to abide by the OpenSSF Code of Conduct. So a couple of things here on the agenda here. Let me start with, so first off, we currently have a dev environment for Fresca now. So that's in GCP. The maintainers of Fresca will have access. If you are a contributor to Fresca and want to become a maintainer of this, let's have a chat. And we're still working out the governance for, you know, who's going to get access to the environment. As a reminder, the main purposes of the main purposes of the dev environment is to sort of you know, some folks are using Macs and whatever, and certain things don't work necessarily on the M1 Macs. Certain things, as we sort of build this out, it's like several different components. It still mostly fits on a machine, a single machine, but as we begin to test out certain things, like for example, testing out having Vault exist in its own cluster, having the Spire, I don't remember what the name for the primary thing is.
Server, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, so for the Spire server as opposed to the Spire agents, for the Spire server, that can be in a different cluster. And then everything else inside of, and then so we can have those two clusters and we can test some of that out, and we can begin to start to actually really demo this in earnest, where, you know, we can start to play around with, hey, do our assumptions about Fresca actually work once we start to make it look a little bit more like what we would expect this to be running in production? If the answer is yes, one of the other goals of this is to then bring this as a proposal to the TAC for potentially running Fresca as a service for certain Linux Foundation projects that might want to use something like Fresca for whatever reason. And so, yeah, that that kind of ties into the next bit. But any questions about the dev environment? Okay. And so for the folks who do have access right now on the call, which I believe this is Brendan and Brad and myself, a few of the other folks can't make it today. They're all in transit. But there's a few other folks who have access. We're going to be starting to try and spin this up in the next couple of days. We already have some Terraform, or we use a thing called, we've been playing around with a thing called TerraSpace, but we've been using some Terraform to spin some of this stuff up and test some of that out. So we do plan to kind of try out in the next couple of days with the goal here of with the goal of making this with the goal of you know, checking, see, you know, does it make a good, is it a good idea to are our assumptions about Fresca correct? That's it. Okay, cool. So the next question, which also is sort of tied into some stuff with the dev environment, is the GitHub npm RFC discussions. So for folks who aren't aware, there's an npm RFC up. Let me see if I can find this. It's here, and I'll post it in the meeting notes. But and I'll also post it in chat here. So this RFC is to try and start associating identities with npm packages, so that we can start to sort of say, hey, somebody actually signed off, like an approved person or whatever signed off on a package. And tied into that is also trying to do that with Salsa. So, could you use GitHub Actions to generate Salsa metadata, and then npm will say, okay, great, you are doing the right things. You're generating appropriate Salsa metadata. Obviously, a lot of this still needs to be confirmed by the end user to sort of say, hey, do I trust that metadata? But and I trust who's generating that metadata. But that's kind of a start, and it helps sort of tie in stuff like right now they're focused on tying stuff like OIDC identities like GitHub into the npm packages signatures and Salsa attestations. So this would be like a GitHub OIDC token based on a GitHub action, something like that. But I had spoken to a few of the folks from GitHub last week about if, and to be clear, some of this is kind of would require some additional work from potentially the Spire side. It's a little unclear. But one of the things that we were discussing is potentially we could do something like, if we ran eventually Fresca as a service underneath the OpenSSF for certain open source projects, and if you look through the RFC, there have been a few folks who've made a couple of comments saying, well, what if I have an open project and I don't want to use GitHub Actions? What if I want to use something else? There's potentially some, obviously some issues there. So the thing that's being discussed is, if we used OIDC, and to start off with, it would probably be GitHub OIDC, but long-term, it might be something else. Could you use that OIDC in conjunction with Fulcio to sort of generate certificates, and then use something like Tough in conjunction with Spire to start to say, like, okay, great, here's how we're like, where you can tie whatever the actual Spire workload cert all the way back to the OIDC token in some way, and the claims being made in the OIDC token. That was one of the things that we were sort of discussing. And I'm not super familiar. At least looking through, it seems like it should at least be conceptually possible. Whether or not it's possible without additional changes to Spire, I'm not sure, or Fulcio or whatever. But just wanted to throw that out there, because there have been folks who've been sort of saying, hey, it would be really nice if there is something like an open source CI/CD system that just sort of, as a service. So stuff like the Linux Foundation can come in and say, great, we have a builder for stuff that doesn't fit on GitHub Actions, or where the folks are like, hey, I don't want to use GitHub Actions for some reason or another, or hey, I'm building on ARM and I need to have ARM nodes or whatever, things that are not the easiest thing to do in GitHub. So just wanted to throw that out there. Wanted to get folks' thoughts. Brendan?
Just to clarify, what do you mean by the what exactly is the claim that you're looking for with, like, I'm trying to understand what you mean by sign the Spire stuff, or like,
Oh, so
I'm not clear what the direction is that
yeah. So to generate the Salsa metadata today in GitHub Actions, right? It uses the OIDC token.
Yeah.
The OIDC token reaches out to Fulcio for a cert, whatever, and then signs it.
Yeah.
And so you can back up you know what claims are being made by the OIDC token, like, oh, it was this GitHub action against this thing at this time, whatever. That's all sort of encoded in there, and you can do that. And so the question would be, is there a way, if we were to run OpenSSF as a service, that you could still do that same federation to OIDC, right? Have something like an OpenSSF, GitHub, like OIDC, or Google OIDC, it doesn't matter, whatever, and in a way such that, like, when if NPM says, hey, we trust these OIDC providers and these things, you can say, great, well, we have a federation through these mechanisms and yada yada, and that allows us to sort of take any of those OIDC tokens, turn them into falsio certs, do some extra magic, and that's it's a little unclear to me, and turn them into Spire workloads. But you still have that ability to kind of go back and say, yes, this is the OpenSSF Fresca deployment. This is the happening at the time, and this build, and so on. And so people, given that it would be an open source builder, folks would get access to the build logs and yada yada, and be able to kind of see, oh, okay, let me go back to the OpenSSF and say, okay, cool, let me take a look at what's going on there.
Yeah, so Spire has, like, the Spire server has OIDC support, but in the sense that, the root is tied to basically whatever OIDC root Spire is, so you can get I think the question there is, like, for most Spire deployments, it's like, how do I, like, not all Spire deployments are equal.
That's true. And I was kind of looking at it saying, if we're running our cluster, do we need to still depend on external OIDC, or should we depend on whatever our internal one is, and whether that's our Spire server or whatever else? It means that someone's going to have to look at our environment and say, yeah, this is a trusted environment. We're going to add your keys to our list of trusted keys.
Yeah, and I think Hayden was working on, I can't remember, what was the proposal in Paul's show, is like, all right, maybe you can register multiple IDC providers, and then, like, could also take the stance if we say, okay, we'll do any IDC provider, but the metadata will be in there. It's up to you to decide whether you want to trust that provider.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, any of those things I think are reasonable. Like, I think just to take it up a level and just talk about the goal, right? Yeah, the goal here is a decent amount of folks have been saying, if you look at the RFC, like, being like, oh, you're requiring me to use GitHub Actions, or what if I don't want to use one of these paid things? You're saying I can't use my own internal builder, because one of the problems is, especially for public NPM packages, is like, it's hard today, right, to if it's a public NPM package, they're trying to say, hey, your build should be out in the open, so that we can kind of go back and look at it, right, so that we know that this was not just built on your laptop, which apparently, if you've been reading the news, has been happening in a lot of very, very large companies. But
not my
Laptop and server, they're the same, right? They're just computers.
Yeah.
So I'm going to harp back on one of my old favorite topics, which is looking at NPM stuff. I'm thinking this is JavaScript we're compiling into different JavaScript there. Is that reproducible?
Well,
if that's reproducible, then where I'm going with that is, you don't necessarily have to trust a single OIDC provider. You could have, let's trust the SSF one, let's trust, or Fresca one, bounce around to a couple of different ones, and then you get your trust by saying, okay, I've built this on 2 or 3 different cloud providers. I'm not just trusting Google, I'm trusting A, B, and C out there, and they all came up with the same thing.
Yeah. Just to be clear, if you look through the RFC, they are talking about supporting other things. I think the thing that they're also looking to do is try and they want to make sure at some level there is a list of claims that can be verified back to preferably the OIDC provider, or some sort of you know, in this case, it would be the Fresca as a service kind of thing to the open source tools. Some way of saying, okay, this was a Fresca build that did these things at this time, yada, yada, yada. I think that sort of thing is
So is the target more keyless signing, or, I mean, where you're just using the public recore record to keep track of the audit trail, or do you need the specific attestation from a specific OIDC provider?
for now, that might be the case. And some of it is being used also as a way to tie back, because I believe the OIDC token from GitHub also has stuff like when it gets triggered as part of a GitHub action or a GitHub workflow, it has a thing of like, it was triggered based on this repo. So, you know, like, okay, you have a claim being made by the OIDC provider that, yes, it was this repo that did the thing. There's some additional sort of questions on how do you actually trace back to make sure that, you know, yeah, that build did literally come from that source. And it wasn't, you know, something else. But that's kind of like the route that some of that's going. And yeah, so there's a bunch of info in the RFC there where they do also plan to support different OIDC providers. I have a feeling the RFC has gotten so large with so many comments or whatever, it loads really slow for me. I don't know why, but just but anyway, yeah, that's kind of the gist of it. I recommend folks, at least it's relatively long, but just take a look at the PR for the there's a rendered version there. There's some interesting stuff about Salsa and trying to make sure that we push the Salsa stuff. Hey, Fresca already hits a relatively high level of Salsa by default. And as we kind of build this out as a service for something like the OpenSSF, it could be really nice to just be able to say, great, if there is a, you know, if there is a project that wants to build something and they don't want to use GitHub Actions for, let's say, something like NPM, and then we also would probably anticipate that something like this, we expect to probably be seeing things like this for PyPI, right? And Maven and whatever else in the probably coming months, for they're going to start to try to push and say, great, we want to be able to sign stuff, verify the signatures, and also have attestations and be able to sort of have some of that verification. And yeah, I think, just to be clear, I think Fresca could be a great fit here. You know, it sounds like it might be relatively reasonable if we run this thing as a service to do that. But yeah, just wanted to throw that out there. Any other questions? Okay, so that's pretty much those two topics. Give me 1 second. So next up, for folks who aren't aware, there is a Salsa tooling working group that happens at 10 a.m. Eastern time every Friday. And just wanted to kind of throw that out there for folks who aren't aware. We've been talking a little bit about stuff like Fresca and stuff like Guac and some of these other tools that are kind of trying to come in together and say like, hey, here's, you know, Fresca as a builder, it builds and generates Salsa metadata, you know, tools like, you know, Guac that are trying to sort of say, okay, great, the information that are coming out of builders like Fresca, let's try and ingest all of that and answer questions. So that's just wanted to kind of throw that out there to folks. You know, definitely looking for additional participation, especially from people who like are aware of other tools, who are also, you know, hands-on keyboard, would be really useful, just to make sure that, you know, as we're kind of talking up through some of the stuff, we want to make sure that we actually have folks who understand the underlying things and can actually add the features that might be needed to some of the tools. Like there's a Salsa GitHub generator out of the Salsa project itself. There's stuff like Fresca, there's stuff like Guac, there's stuff like some of the additional things that need to be added into Sigstore and all that good stuff. So just throwing that out there. And this is also part of the Salsa 1.0 push. Any questions, comments, concerns? Cool. Next up is, I think in the next couple of weeks, we want to start generating a roadmap now that we have a dev environment and we can start to actually test this thing in earnest. I think we want to go out and figure out what might be required, or what we actually want to see. And so for folks who are on the call who love to hear from you about any sort of features you want or any issues you think you've seen, so that we can start adding it in into Fresca here, because we would love to, like, this is once again my pie in the sky sort of thing. I would love to at least have a beta sort of thing of Fresca up and running for, let's say, some OpenSSF projects that they can use it to build. And I can imagine it, being a set of baseline pipelines that automatically include stuff like scorecard and the security insights and all that good stuff. All in something that OpenSSF can then show, to other people, saying, hey, you want to start following the best practices, this is what it could look like. And then showing, how it actually prevents stuff like supply chain attacks, and stuff like that. So any thoughts about that? Any thoughts on how we should be writing up the roadmap or anything like that?
Don't have a lot of thoughts on writing up in general. I just know the short-term things I'm working on right now, which hopefully is getting us to look a little bit more like what it would look like in a actual end user environment where you have people doing git commits and not running make commands.
Cool. Yeah. But definitely looking for other folks, any sort of input. If folks think this is sort of like not valuable, that's also okay, right? We can kind of look at how to shift as well.
I've seen other projects that do a Git repo that just say, here's our high-level roadmap, open up an issue if you want to get something on there, and then we have an idea of, from that Git
Cool.
repo here, the things come down the pipeline and stuff gets visibility if you want to change it. So I know Docker did a roadmap. I think probably even GitHub did their own roadmap, just putting it up in a Git repo itself. I think there's a way you can move things into an actual roadmap in there and you see it moving across the boxes.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. All right. Well, that's the majority of stuff I had on the agenda. Do folks have anything else they wanted to bring up, or I'm still waiting on the Linux Foundation to create a Fresca whatchamacallit, a Fresca logo. Hoping to maybe have that done before KubeCon, but we'll see.
I think in the near term, Brad will see me messing around in a bunch of his space, doing some Q-line changes in there. I'm pulling in tecton triggers is another one of the data types that Q-line can point to. So yeah, we'll see what that looks like after I'm done with it.
Cool.
Yeah, I wonder at some point if we might need to split out some of the examples and that kind of stuff from the core Fresca,
I definitely have a
service,
vision.
if you will, right?
I definitely have that vision in terms of we need to split out the spinning up of the Kubernetes environment, because a lot of people are going to bring their own Kubernetes environment, don't want to spin up a Minikube. The spinning up of the developer environment, because that's a lot of developer tools where we're assuming everything's on a cluster where that's not really how it's going to be in production. We need to document everything we're doing in there so that people that do this in production can handle those prerequisites themselves. Spinning up Fresca itself, and then spinning up the examples on top of Fresca. And I think we got like 4 separate categories there, and we need to get that properly distinguished. Right now, it's all just one make quick start that does everything, and it looks nice, but for actual end users, there's some work to do.
Cool. Cool. I think that definitely makes sense. And offline we can chat a little bit about that as well. I think it's I agree, because it also helps us do stuff like the cadence of updating Fresca can be different than the cadence of updating the examples. Splitting that out also into its own repos. The installation stuff, I think one of the problems has been, as we've been sort of talking just to folks generally in the open source space, and they've sort of said, hey, look, I can run this on my Minikube, but if I do another thing, like everything just sort of falls apart, and it's not super easy. And so I think there's definitely stuff on that end. And actually, one of the big open questions is, it probably doesn't make sense based on how complicated it is for Fresca to be like a Helm chart, because of all the templating you would have to do and that sort of thing. And to be clear, it's been a while. I know, like, with stuff like, if K-Sonnet was still around, I'd say we should do something like that. Not necessarily literally that, but something, yeah.
I'll just throw out a question if we're running out of topics here. Over on the salsa tooling conversation from earlier, is there a link, a repo?
Oh,
anything out
yes.
there we can
Yes.
look at?
That's what I forgot to. So let me see if I can find this. So there's a couple of different things that we're also looking for feedback on.
So I got a calendar entry. I found that, but I won't be able to make the meeting. So I can always follow up watching the recordings while I do my spinning in the morning.
So there's 2 documents here. And then there's also what we're currently working on. And we really want to make sure we move through this quickly, is so we've decided on focusing on distribution and discovery of salsa metadata, because you have a lot of builders that all build the metadata, whether it's GitHub Actions, whether it's Fresca, whether it's any of these other things. And so we really want to make sure here that really want to make sure here that we kind of move quickly with this, because we actually want to start to hit the actual requirements in there. So for example, there's concern about, okay, assuming, let's say, some of the stuff, for example, Fresca stores salsa attestations in both Recore as well as in OCI. What can people do to sort of say, okay, great, well, I pulled in the attestation for, and we know that there's some work being done on this, but like, I know I can pull an attestation for the image, but not the parent images. And what work is being done to sort of pull those down as well, to pull attestations down for the parent images, and what can we do there to sort of sort that out, and that kind of thing. But yeah, we're trying to really make sure that this sort of thing gets addressed within like Figure next week or so, just to say, great, we have a few big ticket items that need to get done with hands-on keyboard. Like these are features for tooling in Salsa. The thing that we really don't want to end up, and we're already starting to see in some certain places, is this sort of thing of like, well, you know, Salsa, which has been now doing this for about a year, or literally a year, has been we're trying to push out to 1.0, and we're trying to see what the big gaps are, and if there are things that Fresca, et cetera, or wherever, you know, we can help add additional features, and so that folks can see like, okay, great, here's this feature that's missing from Salsa builders. Here's how Fresca does it. Here's how GitHub action. Here's how a GitHub action does it, or whatever. That's what we're trying to kind of push through, and that seemed to be the big one.
Cool, thanks. I'll give those docs a look.
So that's about it. Any other questions, comments? Otherwise, we can end it a bit early. And once again, I'm going to try and figure out what's going on with the Fresca meeting getting deleted off the calendar.
Sounds good.
Cool.
Give
Talk to y'all
everyone
later.
20 minutes. All right.
Yeah.
Till next time.
Cheers.